As a business person, understanding the basics of negotiation is essential so you can effectively negotiate even the smallest, most insignificant debates within all your business relationships. Hiring an attorney or professional negotiator to handle your every negotiation isn't financially feasible, although we strongly suggest that you hire a good attorney for major negotiations, such as selling your business. No two negotiations are alike, but there are some broad categories of negotiation types that can help you define the context in which you'll be negotiating. Here are the 4 broad categories of negotiations and under what circumstances they're typically used. Win-win. We both come out on top. The issue is important to you. You value your relationship with the other party. You have enough time to search for an approach and solution that satisfies everyone. Win-lose. I win, you lose. The issue is important to you. Preserving your relationship with the other party doesn't matter. You have the time to beat the other party into submission. You can't use a win-win strategy because the other party will take advantage of you. Lose-win. I'll let you win this one. The issue isn't important. You value your relationship with the other party. You're under time constraints and want to finish the negotiation quickly, so you're willing to lose to accomplish that. Lose-lose. We should just get this done. The issue is relatively unimportant to both parties. You may build a relationship based on mutual suffering. Time and/or transaction costs are primary considerations. You're willing to compromise to resolve the situation. Although it would be nice if both parties could win in every negotiation, win-win situations often aren't possible. In fact, sometimes you may even choose to lose a negotiation. Why would you go into a negotiation planning to lose? You may choose not to play the game. Recall the many times a day you face negotiations, most of which are probably B or C level issues. Because the rewards for these issues aren't great, working to come up with a win-lose or a win-win negotiation isn't worth your time, resources, and effort. A business negotiation requires some thought and preparation if you want to be effective and achieve your desired outcome. Mind Tools. mindtools.com, a great career site that we often recommend, suggests that you answer some critical questions as you prepare for a negotiation. What do you want to walk away with after this negotiation? What does your opponent want? You need to know what you're trying to achieve by negotiating. What outcome do you want? You also need to figure out what your opponent's objective is. Try putting yourself in your opponent's shoes and figure out how you'd approach the negotiation from her perspective. Do you and your opponent have anything to trade or offer to make a deal work? You should always go into a negotiation prepared to give something away, typically something that doesn't matter a great deal to you, but is considered valuable by your opponent. What are the alternatives to a negotiated agreement? This is often referred to as your BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, what's your B plan? What happens if you can't come to an agreement? What are the interests of the various parties to the negotiation? Not all the parties who influence the negotiation may be present at the bargaining table. The real parties are those who can say yes or no. In other words, the decision makers. It's always best to negotiate with someone who can make a decision. Failing that, you need to attempt to get that information from the person with whom you're negotiating. What are the consequences of winning or losing the negotiation? Calculating the upsides and downsides of your negotiation is a wise thing to do because they can affect your strategy. If the upside is high, you gain a lot from winning. You'll likely employ a win-win strategy if your relationship with your opponent is important to you. On the other hand, if that relationship isn't important, you may be more willing to go for a win-lose strategy if win-win isn't working. Remember, however, that your opponent is looking at the negotiation in the same manner. So if neither of you cares about the relationship, coming to a win-win agreement is going to be tough. What may prevent a successful agreement? Can you identify ways to overcome these challenges? Is there a zone of possible agreement, ZOPA? The best way to end up with a resolution that everyone is satisfied with is to find issues on which you can both agree. Start with those first to set a positive tone and send a signal that you're trying to achieve a win-win agreement. Who has the power in this negotiation? Who stands to lose the most if you can't agree? Whoever has the most to lose will probably be the toughest negotiator. At the same time, whoever has the most to lose will also be more likely to try to find areas of agreement and attempt to arrive at a win-win solution. Are there any possible compromises? Compromise usually is the last resort because compromising is essentially a lose-lose situation unless the issues about which you're compromising aren't significant. Eventually, every negotiation comes down to this question: what is the right thing to do? Assuming that you're the negotiator, the answer depends on your value system and how you believe the other party will respond. The answer also stems from a series of questions that you should ask yourself. There are no right or wrong answers to these questions. You simply need to decide if the answer you choose is compatible with your ethics and value system. The following list presents a few of these questions. How much candor is required for a successful negotiation? For example, we advise you not to reveal your walkaway price or your BATNA because doing so will put you in a weaker position to negotiate. One could say that you're failing to disclose material information, but one could also argue that disclosing too much information may make a win-win solution impossible. Are you required to ensure that the ultimate outcome is fair? If the outcome is win-win, you can assume fairness, but how do you judge a win-lose outcome as fair? You probably don't consider it fair. That's why win-lose should only be undertaken when win-win isn't a possibility. Is the use of economic pressure unethical? Most people are inconsistent in their views of this answer. People may resent the store owner who increases the price of generators and lumber just before hurricane season, but they're okay with the airlines charging more for the same seat a week before the flight than they charged 2 months before. Only you can decide how you would respond to these questions. You also need to recognize that your opponent may have a different value system. For example, your opponent may believe that a win-lose negotiation is fair and a good resolution. Figuring out your opponent's value system isn't easy, but you can get a clue from her tactics after you've spent some time in negotiation with that person. To understand what really goes on in a negotiation, you need to consider the 3 critical elements of any deal: power, time, and information. You'll be successful in your negotiating efforts to the extent that you can control these 3 factors. Consider one of our examples. You want to lease some office space for your business, but the monthly price is too high for your budget. If office space is in short supply, then the broker has power because he can easily find another lessee. On the other hand, if there is an abundance of office space, you, the business owner, have the power because you can choose from many possibilities. If you must be out of your present location within 2 weeks, then time is an issue for you. Finally, information plays a role when the broker knows more about your needs and timing than you know about his. The first thing you need to know about power in negotiations is that to have power, you must believe that you have power, and you must present an aura of power. Several types of power, or lack thereof, come into play in negotiating situations. Sometimes you have legitimate power. Your position determines your legitimate power. As CEO of a company, you have legitimate power to make decisions in negotiations, so you need to let people see you as capable of carrying out that role. If the other party involved in negotiation is the CEO of a company, you must be sure that you see that person as a peer and equal. Don't give your opposition more power than he or she is entitled to, because you'll weaken your position in the negotiation. Reward power is the ability to offer rewards to the other party for agreeing to something you want in a negotiation. This power is similar to an incentive system you may use with your employees to get them to be more productive. Be sure that you reward only those solutions that you are looking for. If you reward every point of agreement you come to, the reward loses its value to influence. We don't encourage you to use coercive power in a negotiation setting, because doing so probably won't lead to a win-win conclusion. People don't like to agree because they must. A far better power tactic is to get the other party to do something because he or she wants to. In that situation, your opponent will see the rationale and the benefit of the solution. As an expert, you have a particular skill or knowledge that the other party doesn't have. That additional knowledge or skill gives you a certain amount of power and enables you to deal in a less emotional way. In any negotiation, you should define what expertise you have that may give you power in the process. Or you may just be charismatic. Perhaps you've witnessed instances where a lawyer's reputation and expertise have enabled her to win over a jury, even when the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. Of course, part of that persuasion is due to the next type of power: charisma. Yes, charisma. That certain something that some people have that attracts others to them can play an important role in a negotiation. Charisma can intimidate and distract the other party. One party may be in such awe of the person sitting across the table that he immediately loses any power he may have possessed. If you're negotiating with a charismatic person, remind yourself that she needs something from you too. Because of the information technology revolution, people today believe that transactions, tasks, and meetings should happen instantaneously. They lose patience when others don't seem to have any sense of time or appreciation for their deadlines. Frankly, no nation focuses on the clock more than the United States. Americans often plan their days down to the minute, especially in the business world. Remember, a get-it-done-now attitude, however, doesn't work well when you're sitting at the negotiating table. During a negotiation, the person who isn't operating by the clock definitely has the edge. Eastern cultures are masters at the game of patience and relationship building. They tend to take the long view of the outcome of a negotiation, whereas Americans look for the quick win. When you go to the bargaining table, remember these tips about time. Be patient and try not to reveal your deadline. Understand that each party has a deadline, no matter what picture the other party paints for you. Recognize that you probably won't achieve a negotiated agreement until the last possible moment. Fundamentally, negotiation is about gathering information so that you can reach a decision and achieve a resolution. Each party strives to give only the information that's absolutely necessary, and each party attempts to gather loads of information from the other side to gain an advantage in negotiating a resolution. Information is particularly important if you want to achieve a win-win solution, because you must understand each party's interests to find a way to satisfy those interests. To gain information you need from the other party, you may try to appear a bit confused about what the other party says. Asking for clarification on something simply forces the other party to restate a demand in another way. Maybe that new statement will provide a piece of information that you didn't have before. Of course, you should recognize that the other party is trying to do the same thing with you. Here are 3 more tips that should help you control the flow of information. Control the information you give out and carefully word what you say. Give only as much as you have to, and then stop talking. Practice active listening. Take notes and attempt to find patterns in the other party's arguments that will lead you to an understanding of what he or she really wants and why. Watch the other party's nonverbal cues carefully. More than 70% of communication is nonverbal. For example, if you note that while you're speaking, the other party sits with her arms folded in a closed position, you can assume that she isn't receptive to what you're saying. On the other hand, if she leans forward when you speak, you know that you're saying something that interests her. Playing the negotiation game is much easier if you know the rules and you think about how you're going to play before the negotiation starts. Seasoned negotiators recognize the natural sequence of activities that take place during a negotiation, a sequence that assumes you've done the necessary preparation. The reason the sequence is natural is that it makes sense and the order is logical. When you don't follow the sequence, things can get crazy and negotiating becomes more difficult. The simple sequence of negotiation has 4 parts. 1. Set the stage and chat with the players. Creating an environment conducive to good negotiation is important. Often this environment is a neutral playing field so that one side doesn't have the home court advantage over the other. You also want to spend some time on pre-negotiation chatter to put everyone at ease and to establish procedures for the negotiation process. 2. Separate interest from positions. Most negotiations start with the parties stating their positions, such as, "I must get $45 per unit." However, position statements reflect a win-lose attitude and don't leave the door open for other potentially more effective negotiating strategies. You must get beyond position statements to discover what the other party really wants, their interests in the negotiation. Separate the people from the problem. Perhaps the other party's real goal is to cover his costs. If that's the case, you may be able to satisfy this interest in many ways. As a result, you have the potential for a mutually beneficial outcome. 3. Create alternatives that can offer a win-win solution. After you understand each other's interests, you can begin to develop proposals that can meet them all. Don't worry about making a proposal complex and legally correct at this point. You merely want to establish agreement on the fundamental points of the negotiation. It's important, however, that you consider all possible solutions that fall into the win-win category. 4. Construct a winning agreement. The final stage of the negotiation is where all the fun happens. If the negotiation is typical, you'll be running up against a deadline, yours or the other party's. Now it takes some trading, bargaining, swapping, and perhaps even compromising to mold the agreement into a form that's acceptable to both sides. If you can find some objective criteria for making decisions that suit your situation, you'll be more likely to reach a fair agreement. Each time you reach final agreement on a point, have both parties initial that point of agreement so you feel like you've accomplished something and can move forward. One of the biggest problems people have in negotiations is that they don't know what they want to have achieved by the time the negotiation is over. How do you successfully negotiate when your target keeps moving? If you can't define a goal for a negotiation, don't negotiate. You can become a more effective negotiator if you consider the following tips. Go in with a plan. Negotiating for something important isn't the time to wing it. Set some objectives that you want to achieve and decide what you're willing to give up to make things work. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Try to figure out the other party's interests and needs. Ask questions and try to see things from the other person's point of view. Be a super listener. You always learn more by listening than by speaking. In fact, talking too much in a negotiation can hurt you because you give away too much information. Always let the other party begin and do most of the talking. Never threaten or intimidate. Explaining your point of view is necessary, but don't issue subtle threats about what will happen if the other party doesn't accept your proposal. This only serves to alienate the other party. In addition, you're less likely to achieve an amicable solution. Be patient. Patience is a virtue, is certainly true in negotiation. Define an acceptable backup strategy. What if you can't come to a win-win agreement? This is a very important question because you need to know whether you can afford the luxury of walking away from a negotiation. If you've defined an acceptable backup strategy, you put yourself in a better position to walk away from a bad situation. How many times have you heard people boasting about great wins at the negotiating table? Usually they attribute their wins to some great tactical skill on their part. For example, I always use the silent tactic. It works every time. My opponent gives me her final offer and I remain silent. My silence throws her so off guard that she starts backing down even further and gives 2 concessions to get me to respond. During the entire negotiation, I only made one insignificant concession. Boy, was I the master of that negotiation. Was he the master of that negotiation? Maybe not. Just because his opponent made some concessions doesn't mean that they were valuable. They may have been her giveaways. What if she had planned to make 7 concessions and only gave up 2? Now would you say he was a master negotiator? Here's the point. A negotiation is successful to the extent that it achieves the goals set by the parties involved. In other words, both parties in the negotiation must define what success means to them. The following list looks at some signs of a good outcome. A good outcome beats your other choices. Working on an agreement with the other party must be more valuable than your best alternative to the negotiation, or negotiating doesn't make sense. Your backup option, your BATNA, or second choice, should be a good one, but the outcome from a negotiated deal should have much greater value because you put more effort into it. A good outcome makes everyone happy. To get the other party to accept your deal, you must satisfy his or her interests, at least in part. The classic story of 2 siblings fighting over an orange illustrates this idea. Each sibling wants the entire piece of fruit, but each is willing to accept something less rather than get nothing at all. So they divide the orange in half. The first sibling proceeds to throw away the fruit and use the peel to bake half a pie. The second sibling throws away the peel and eats the fruit. Of course, if they had understood each other's interests, they could have found a better way to satisfy them both. A good outcome is the best solution among many. Generating more than one solution to a situation and then choosing the best of the alternatives is an important step in negotiating. With this method, you're more likely to choose the most optimal solution. In the case of the siblings with the orange, a much better solution would have been to give one sibling the whole fruit and the other the whole peel. That additional option would have satisfied both their interests and provided a win-win outcome. A good outcome occurs when no one is taken to the cleaners. Everyone should come away from the negotiation feeling that, given the circumstances, the achieved outcome is the best possible end. If both parties don't clearly understand the rationale for the outcome, you haven't achieved an optimal outcome. A good outcome tells everyone what to do and how. After you've reached an agreement, ensuring that both parties understand what to do and when is important. Coming up with some action steps is a good way to make sure that both parties carry out the agreement in the way that everyone expects. You can find many great books about negotiating in business situations, but allow us to save you a bit of trouble by consolidating some of the important information. All the how-to books contain some very basic rules that are true in every negotiation. The following lists present these basics that you can use as a checklist before you begin negotiations. First up, the don'ts of business negotiations. Don't say yes to a proposal the first time you hear it, even if the proposal is too good to be true, especially if it seems too good to be true. Wait and hear it again before making your final decision. The other party may be testing the waters to gauge how desperate you are for this deal. Don't be the first to name a price. Always try to get the other party to initiate the talk so that you gain important information that will help you negotiate more effectively. Don't negotiate with yourself. Some people, faced with silence after an offer, feel the need to fill the space with chatter. Often they end up raising their price or inadvertently justifying the other party's point of view. At that point, they may as well end the negotiations because they've lost any power they may have had. Don't be afraid to say no. Remember that the opposite of no is yes. In a negotiation, there's really nothing in the middle between yes and no. So if you're not happy with something you hear, just say no. Doing so forces the other side to possibly reconsider and present the idea in a different way that may be more acceptable to you. Don't be intimidated. Everything in business is negotiable, even if you're dealing with writing in contract form. Don't be intimidated by professional-looking documents with ironclad terms. Don't trust the other party's actions. If the other party arrives late to the negotiation or appears disinterested, don't assume that this action reflects a lack of interest. The other party just wants you to think that. Don't talk about the deal or the negotiation in seemingly empty offices, hallways, restrooms, or elevators, and definitely not on airplanes. You just never know who's listening. Now that you know what not to do, here are a few things to do in every negotiation. Do try to hold the negotiation at your site or at a neutral site. Going to the other party's office puts you at a disadvantage because your opponent will be more comfortable and will also have the power to control your level of comfort in the room to his or her advantage. Do deal only with the person who can make the decision. When you buy a car, the salesperson may claim that she must talk with her manager first. That move only gives the two of them a chance to renegotiate the deal. Control the negotiation by making a deal only with the person who can say yes or no. Do control your temper and emotions. If you can't control yourself, let someone else do the negotiating for you. Yelling and screaming never results in a good deal. Think of negotiation as a game you can win if you prepare for it, practice, and define some specific achievable outcomes that will offer all parties to the negotiation a win-win solution.